The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Heidi Johnston is the author of Life in the Big Story, Your Place in God's Unfolding Plan, and most recently, Choosing Love in a Broken World, a book for teenage girls that attempts to tell the truth about relationships. She lives in Belfast, Northern Ireland, C.S. Lewis's hometown. Heidi is a delight and very wise. I think you're going to love hearing from her. Heidi Johnston, thank you so much for being on the Habit Podcast.
Good to be here.
I always love talking to you, and I love your wisdom and your insight. Last time we talked, so we actually recorded an episode from my old homegrown podcast that was not salvageable for the purpose of this new highly professional podcast produced by the Rabbit Room, and so I wanted to sort of talk to you again and get some of your sort of salvage some of the things you had to say there. And last time we talked, it was October, and you had until December to finish your most recent book, Choosing Love, and at the time, you were struggling with procrastination. Did you make it? Did you hit your deadline?
Common, yeah.
Yeah.
I did make my deadline. Yes, I did. I didn't do an awful lot else between October and December, but I did make my deadline.
So, how did you overcome procrastination?
Well, I'm very much a pressure worker in every aspect of life. At school, I was the person that started studying 2 days before the exam and didn't sleep. So I tend to think if I have a couple of weeks, then I've plenty of time. And I work under pressure generally. So yeah, that suited me. Well,
I'm so glad that you overcame these procrastinatory tendencies of yours.
Temporarily, anyway.
It's only temporarily, okay.
Only temporarily.
This was not a story of victory for all time. This was just a one-off.
No, I really wish it was. That would have been a good story. But yeah, it's definitely something I struggle with ongoing, particularly with writing, actually. But generally, yeah, I'm a terrible procrastinator.
Yeah. Do you have any idea why?
I know. I think with writing, it's because I work from home. I think in some senses, writing's one of the hardest things I do from a discipline point of view. It's so much easier to put on a load of laundry or prepare the dinner or do something that I feel like I can do without having to face the possibility that I'll have nothing to say. So it's something that I'm working on.
Yeah, you're probably not going to fail at doing another load of laundry.
No, I'm pretty good at that now.
Yeah. But you might fail at writing. It's painful. I mean, to think about.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah, totally.
And so that's kind of fear. How do you get over that? How do you get over fear?
I don't even know if I know the answer to that. I guess you just have to sit down and get on with it. One of my writing practices that I do is I generally read Doug McKelvey's Liturgy for Those Fearing Failure before I start writing.
Oh, wow.
To remind myself both that I'm not doing it myself. Well, to remind myself of that, but it sort of takes away the pride and the complete panic.
Yeah.
Helps me get a bit of perspective on what it is I'm doing.
Yeah. Tell me about that liturgy. What do you remember from it?
It talks a lot about the fact that what you're doing is God sort of breathing life into the work that you're doing. Here I have it above my desk. Apart from the Spirit of God breathing life into your incomplete and sin-tainted efforts, apart from the Father blessing and multiplying your inadequate offerings, no lasting benefit will come of your labours. So that's the sort of theme of it, and I just find it so helpful before I write to remind myself of all those things.
Yeah, that's great. I know one thing we've talked about before is struggling with kind of imposter syndrome.
Yeah, definitely. I'm always waiting for Pete Peterson to discover I shouldn't be writing for the Rabbit Room. Any day now, the email's coming.
Well, yeah, the good news is I don't think he listens to this podcast anyway, so I think you're safe for a little while longer.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of that, though. And I was thinking about it today, and I think social media is a big thing as well. As a writer, you follow other writers, and particularly as a mum, you go on and you see these mums with kids that are getting up at 4 a.m. to write, and they're reading classics while their kids do craft with homemade Play-Doh, and I just feel like such an underachiever. You sort of think, yeah, one of these days people are going to find out I'm not that smart or that cool. I've talked to you enough to know that you're both smart and cool. So for what that's worth, I don't know if that's how helpful that is, but. Well, okay.
So, your most recent book, Choosing Love, is a book for teenage girls. Is that fair to say? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, teenage girls or girls even in their early 20s. Just sort of dealing with the whole idea of relationships, that sort of age group. Mm-hmm. Or dealing with the initial stages of relationships, should I say. Definitely a lifelong journey.
Yeah, right. So you have daughters. Are they both teenagers? Are they younger than that?
Yeah. I have two teenage girls. Who I wanted to have these conversations with, so I basically tricked them by writing a book that they were then forced to read. So
oh, nice. Good job.
It's a great way to have that conversation.
I'd like to ask you, how do you get your kids to read your books? I've never had any success with that. But
because it was a book for teenage girls, as I went through it, they read each chapter and gave me feedback on it. And then it's designed to be sort of read for mothers and daughters or even friends together, so that they can read a short chapter and then chat about the discussion questions at the end. So I asked them for their help to do that. So actually they turned out to be great editors, which was a discovery. But it meant I actually got to talk about the subject matter with them as well, which was great. It was really good.
Oh, that's great. So where did this book come from? How did you decide this was a book you needed to write?
Basically because of my own girls. As a teenage girl, I was pretty terrified of teenage girls, so it's not something that I ever thought I would be doing. They're just a terrifying group of people. But I am so sick of the lies that teenagers are being peddled when it comes to relationships and sexuality, and I just wanted to have this conversation with them. I feel like we've bought into this idea that like the ultimate goal of love is me feeling happy and me being satisfied. And you're married, marriage can be wonderful and satisfying, but also really, really, really hard. And sometimes love's about making the hard choice to put the other person first, even when you don't feel like it. It's that whole intentionality thing again, but it leads to something that's deeper and more real. And I just wanted to have those conversations with them. The whole biblical idea of covenant as well, that's so central to the story of the Bible, but also to marriage and love. It's so rich and so beautiful. And I think sometimes as Christians, we can be guilty of saying we don't do this and we don't do that because we're Christians, rather than, hey, look at this. This is beautiful and it's rich and it's deep and it's something worth fighting for. And that's what I wanted them to know.
Oh, that's great.
I also wanted them to know that being satisfied in God is the starting point, because I think there's a danger if you try to get your satisfaction from someone else, you're placing a burden on them that they were never meant to carry.
Yeah.
And so we need to be satisfied in God first and then love someone else out of the overflow of that. So I guess those are just the things I wanted them to know. And I figured if they were the only ones that ever read it, I would lose nothing.
Yeah, right. As you talk about this and your goals, really what you're doing is in one sense what we're always doing when we sit down to write, and that's trying to tell a truer story than the one the world is telling. I think that's one of that kind of is the great gift of the writer, is not escapism, but rather, hey, let me tell you something that's truer than what you thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
In writing this book, you're giving your girls and others, beyond your girls, the this, really a reality check. Here's what's ultimately true. Here's what's, for all the stories that you hear floating around, here's a truer story. Yeah,
I guess that idea of there being an ultimate truth isn't very popular now, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and actually it's the only way to counter those feelings. I have nothing to say, because it makes me realize that actually in myself I don't have anything to say. That it has to come from beyond me to have any meaning at all. Otherwise it's just me giving you the thoughts in my mind, which isn't going to help anybody.
That's I love that. I love this idea that the writer's job is to look outward and not so much looking inward. Obviously, looking inward is a part of the process, but I don't think most writers don't have the problem of not looking inward enough, right?
Definitely not.
If I knew a writer who never looked within, I would say, hey, you need to be a little more introspective. I just don't know any people who are insufficiently introspective who end up writing, Yeah,
totally. I've been, a few years ago, I wrote a piece for the Rabbit Room on Psalm 73. I don't know if you've ever found yourself in a passage of scripture that you just can't get out of again. It's been just stuck with me ever since. It's the whole idea of the psalm is that at the start, the psalmist is looking out at the world around him and he just feels like his feet are slipping. He's losing his grip on what's true, and he wants to believe God's real, but the world seems to be totally out of control. And then there's this beautiful turning point in the middle where he comes into the presence of God and suddenly he sees what is real. And I love that his circumstances don't change at all, and the circumstances of the world around him don't change, but his perspective changes completely when he comes to God, allows him to show him what's real.
Oh, that's great. And again, that's the gift. That's one of the main gifts a writer offers to the world, is saying, hey, look at this.
Yeah, and we can't do that ourselves. You can only do that when you're anchored in what is actually true. And actually, if my brain can grasp truth in its entirety, then that would make truth pretty small.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be encouraging at all.
Yeah. I'm just kind of vaguely remembering a conversation we had at one point, and I'm hoping you can remember enough to sort of pick up from this point. I remember you talking about your job as a writer or as a communicator is to really commit to what's true, and wouldn't it be cool if this were true, but rather, being grounded in what really is true and real that I didn't invent.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so true. You can become so caught up in even the beauty of the telling. I think there's a Lewis quote about any writer that can get so caught up with the beauty of the telling that they lose sight of the truth of what they're actually trying to say. That is not what he said, but that's a paraphrase. Something that, that idea that you're so busy trying to make things beautiful that you lose sight of what it is you're actually trying to say and the beauty of truth itself. I think I shared the Lewis quote that says, "No one who bothers about originality will ever be original."
Oh yeah.
Whereas if you try to tell the truth without caring two pence how often it's been told before, you will 9 times out of 10 become original without ever having noticed it. And I love that. The way to be original is not to strive for originality at all.
Yeah. Have you found that to be true? I mean, have you...
Yeah. Well, I find that if I stick to particularly for me, I tend to write out of the overflow of what I've studied in the Bible. And when I sit down, which actually has become paralyzing for me, of trying to think, like, what can I write that's really interesting? I do just become absolutely paralyzed, and I can't think of anything interesting to write. Whereas if I find something that just grips me in the Bible and start to write about it, and I think that people have heard this 100 times before, those are the things that people say, oh, I've never really noticed that before. That's so helpful.
Yeah.
You think, really?
Yeah.
I thought that was really just standard. So yeah, which turns out it wasn't coming from me at all.
Yeah, right.
Keep saying it, but don't really believe it,
Yeah. And, I mean, this may sound, I don't know how this is going to sound, but when you communicate with Americans, Americans love hearing, your Irish accent. It sounds so great.
I could just read a nursery rhyme and people would be, oh, wonderful.
Yeah, right. I know. I feel like there's some metaphor at work here. You're a special case because you speak in an accent that's different from mine, and so you sound, when you speak in your voice, it sounds original to me, sounds interesting to me. But there's something about that's true for all of us, whether we speak with, whether we're from Northern Ireland or not.
Yeah.
When we speak in our own voice, I mean, it's just what Lewis said. When we tell the truth in our own voice, according to bear witness to what we've seen. The fact that we've seen, my combination of things I've seen is unique to me. If I just tell the truth about what I've seen, I can trust originality to take care of itself.
Yeah. Absolutely. Actually, I was laughing about that the other day. Someone said to me that when they read my book that they could hear it in my voice. And I think they were trying to be funny. And I got so excited, I almost texted you. I was like, Jonathan Rogers would be so proud.
Oh, great. Well, and now people are going to be able to hear your book in your voice because you've done the audio.
It might not be so good.
No, that's exciting that you're doing an audio book. Did you learn anything about your writing from recording an audiobook?
To be honest, I quite often read aloud what I've written anyway.
Because you love your own voice too, I take it.
Yeah, I do. No, do you know, it came from a strange place. My grandmother was pretty much blind. And so when I wrote something, she always wanted to hear it. And
wow.
I always read it to her.
Oh, that's great.
And so I got into the habit of reading it out loud. And so often when I read it out loud, a sentence that I thought worked, when I read it out loud, didn't work at all.
Yeah.
So it's a habit I've kind of developed now.
It's a great
of doing
habit.
that just so that it does flow.
Yeah. Are you a native of Belfast?
Yes, I am.
This is also C.S. Lewis's hometown, right?
It is, absolutely, yes. He grew up about 10 miles from where I live.
But he lost his accent, right?
Yeah, he did. It became very English.
Yeah. Do you see anything about his life and work that you say, aha, I see I see Belfast there?
Geographically, lots of the stuff that you read in the Narnia stories is you can see it in our landscape. Lots of the sort of focal points you say, yeah, that's definitely where he got that from. I'm not sure. Other than that, that's quite a deep question to think on the spot.
Okay, all right.
There's always some little curveball comes in.
Well, was Belfast? Was it a place of trouble and strife when he was growing up there, the way it was later?
No, probably no, because he would only have been here. He was only here till he was about 9 or 10, and then he would have come home to visit. But that was that would have been way before the Troubles and everything. So he would have been well in England by that stage.
I see. So you've got a lot going on in your life besides writing, and you've mentioned that you aren't always regular in your habits for writing, but because you put things off. Consider yourself scolded.
I am. I feel very scolded.
But what can you tell us about the habits that you do have? Or maybe when you are being productive, what do those habits look like?
It's something I've been thinking a lot about recently, actually. I think particularly in the light of last year. I guess one of my big habits would be that I kind of, if there's something in my mind that I want to write, I sit down and write it. But if there's nothing in my mind that I'm thinking that needs to be written, then I don't. And I was having a bit of a mental blank whenever I had that deadline to meet. And yet when I sat down, I did get there. Mm-hmm. And so I've heard you say so many times about just sitting down. Yeah. But I think there's a tendency to think there's so much to be done in life. You know, there's so many things that I need to attend to that if I just sit at my desk for an hour, I could use that time so much more productively. Yeah. And I was thinking, actually, I speak quite a lot about studying the Bible and sort of helping people to learn to study the Bible. And one of the things that I'm always saying is the discipline of studying the Bible has to be intentional, because if you wait to feel like studying, it's never going to happen. Yeah. But if you intentionally choose to show up, then you get these incredible moments when God meets you there. Mm-hmm. And yet, I haven't been applying that same thing to writing, if I'm honest. Yeah. And so I am intending to sort of put disciplines in place this incoming year and see what happens. Maybe we should be doing this podcast again in a year to see what happens if I'm intentional for a year. Maybe it's going to be my most productive year ever.
Yeah, I was about to say, you may have written War and Peace by then.
Yeah, maybe. But I know it is a feeling, and it's one of those things that you kind of have to ask yourself, am I just going to write when something comes into my mind, or is this something I want to do, intentionally and continually?
You use the word failing. That's a lot of moral baggage in the word failing. Do you view it in those terms as a moral, truly as a failing?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, I suppose I do. I've never really thought about it in those terms, but I suppose there is an aspect of feeling if this is what God's called me to do and I'm not doing it, then yeah, I guess there is an aspect of struggling with that. I was just reading Andrew Peterson's Adorning the Dark, and I don't know if you've read the acknowledgements at the start, and he talks about Jamie and how Jamie's art is their family, and I was just so encouraged, you know, as a wife and mom by that, because I mean, Jamie, it's so true. But as for me, it was so encouraging as well that like my only art isn't writing, that that's my art as well is my kids and my home and hospitality, and so I'm not failing in everything.
Yeah. No, I think that is a really important thing to bear in mind, that even if writing is part of your calling, it's not the whole of anybody's calling.
Yeah,
it's part of a larger life, and Stephen King talks about putting your desk in the corner, to remind yourself that your life's not here to support art. It's art is there to support your life.
Yeah, and it's easy to put a lot of pressure on yourself too. I keep trying to remind myself that God doesn't love me because I write. Yeah, I write because He loves me, and He's not going to be disappointed in me if I don't. Yeah,
yeah. And yet, when you actually sit down and write, it feels like you are participating in some joyful thing.
Yeah, it's not that I lose something, but I miss out on something that I wouldn't have if I didn't take the time to show up and be present.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad we've sorted this out, Heidi.
Heidi's a failure, but she's going to do better next year.
No, but I'm glad we've worked through from failure to the language of failure to the language of joy.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so, if you think in terms of this is my calling and I'm not doing it, so I'm failing, there's a limit to how helpful that can be. Whereas if this is part of my calling and I step into it, then there's some joy to be had there that I don't want to miss out on.
And I guess if it's your calling and you step into it and nothing great happens, well, you've still done it. So,
that's right. Yeah.
In that sense, that you've succeeded if you've done what God asked you to do, whatever happens.
Yeah. Yes, it's the basically sowing seeds is our job. The harvest isn't our business.
Yeah. That's another wise word from my granny. She used to say, God said, well done, good and faithful servant, not well done, good and successful servant.
Oh, wow.
I always like that.
Yeah. Same granny that you read to?
Yeah. She had a big influence.
That's great. Any other words of wisdom from your grandmother that you can share with us?
Oh, not off the top of my head.
Okay,
she was a very wise woman.
Yeah. All right. So I always end these interviews with the question, who are the writers who make you want to write?
The writers who make me want to write. It's very cliched, but I have to say that C.S. Lewis has been my big influence. I just love I love how, I don't want to say simple, but so profound and yet so simple the way he writes.
Yeah.
I just love it. And I love how his fiction is so informed by what he understands of the Bible as well.
Yeah.
I just love it. Not necessarily overtly, but just so informed by those themes of truth.
Yeah. What are your favorite C.S. Lewis books?
All of them.
Yeah, right. So fiction, nonfiction.
I've just been rereading the Narnia Chronicles, which I hadn't read for years and years and years. And actually, as an older person, they became more rich rather than less so, which I think is just great. Absolutely great. Sitting sobbing my heart out, and the girls going, "What's the matter?" Nothing. I'm fine.
What about his? What's the one that retells Cupid and Psyche? Till We Have Faces.
Yes. Yeah, I like that one too.
Yeah, okay.
It's good. Yeah, I love. There's a bit in that which gets me every single time about when oh my goodness, mental block. Oriel is kneeling by the river looking for the castle that Psyche is said to have been living in, and and she doesn't believe it's there, and just for a moment the fog lifts and she sees the castle in all its beauty, and then it's gone, but that glimpse is enough to change her entire perspective. And I just love that image of even what God can do by just lifting the veil for a minute and giving us a glimpse of what's true. And that we maybe can't see it again after that, but just that glimpse changes the way we see things.
That's great. Between Screwtape and Great Divorce, which one do you like better?
Screwtape.
Really?
Screwtape, yeah. I took my girls to see a stage production of it last year.
That was fun.
Oh man, it was so good. It was so good.
Yeah. All right, so C.S. Lewis, anybody else who you read them and think, I want to go sit down and write something now?
Actually, I've got really into Wendell Berry recently, which again is quite cliched, but we live in a small town, and my husband's lived here his entire life.
Wow.
He pretty much... you can't walk 2 feet without him meeting somebody that he knows. So I kind of feel like I live in Port William. And for a long time, I found that quite claustrophobic. But since I've been reading that, it's really helped me to see what an incredible gift that is, to live as part of a close-knit community like that, even if it does mean everybody knows what you're doing. Yeah. But yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about that, and that whole idea of just writing about what's in front of you as well.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that truth. That just giving a record of what's in front of you was a worthy endeavor. I sat next to a little girl at a concert. It was like a school concert, or more of a recital where the kids would get up and do their various things. And she had a little notebook, and she was just writing down everything that happened. And so it'd be like, she'd write, the boy stood up, but then he forgot his guitar strap, so he went back to his seat and got it, but now he has it on, and he's about to play a song. And it was just so fun to watch her just, have this totally unself-conscious belief that just by writing down what I see in front of me, that's a worthy endeavor. And I thought,
so great.
That is so gorgeous. I just loved it. And
it's brilliant.
And so she's going to, 3 years from now, look back on it and think, oh, that was so dumb. But in 20 years, when she looks back, she's going to love that she has it,
Yeah, that's so great.
Well, Heidi, it's always, as I've said before, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. And
it's good to talk.
And so I hope we can talk again soon. Thanks for being on The Habit.
Thank you.
The Rabbit Room has partnered with Lipscomb University to make this podcast possible. Lipscomb has graciously given us access to their recording studio in the Center for Entertainment and Arts building. We're so grateful for their sponsorship, their encouragement, and the good work they do in Nashville. Special shout out as well to Jess Ray for letting us use her song Too Good as part of this podcast. Visit jessraymusic.com to hear more of her beautiful songs.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
This podcast was produced by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. All our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.